Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Public Accounts. This is meeting number 97 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, Tuesday, May 8th, 2018. I would remind our committee today that we are being televised, and so I would just encourage all, not just the committee members, but also those in the audience today, to put your phones on mute or on silent, and that way it will be less disruptive. Also, before we begin, I would like to welcome with us today is Ms. Delphine Berthe. She is an analyst and clerk in the French Senate, and she is visiting a number of our committees and just being here in Canada, and so we welcome you to our committee, and we trust that you have a real good time while you're here in Canada. Today we are here to consider the Special Examination Report, the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, of the Fall 2017 reports of the Auditor General of Canada. I welcome the following witnesses today: from the Office of the Auditor General, Mr. Clyde McClellan, Assistant Auditor General, and Mr. Patrick Polan, Director. From Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, we have Claude Lajeunesse, Chair of the Board of Directors, and Richard Sexton, President and Chief Executive Office. And so I will turn it over to you. I will begin with Mr. McClellan, and we will hear from the Auditor General's office. Then we'll go into our other guests and then into the rounds of questioning. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to present the results of our special examination of Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. As you mentioned, joining me at the table is Patrick Polan, the Director responsible for the audit. A special examination of a Crown corporation is a type of performance audit. Specifically, a special examination determines whether a Crown corporation's systems and practices provide reasonable assurance that its assets are safeguarded and controlled, its resources are managed economically and efficiently, and its operations are carried out effectively. This special examination covered the period between the 1st of April 2016 and the 31st of January 2017. Énergie Atomique du Canada.
Atomic Energy of Canada Limited's mandate is to enable nuclear science and technology and fulfill Canada's radioactive waste and decommissioning responsibilities. It receives federal funding, and it delivers its mandate through long-term contracts with a private sector contractor for the management and operation of its sites. In September 2015, the corporation completed a major restructuring, and this led to a new operating model. The goal was to leverage the experience and capabilities of the private sector in order to enhance efficiency and effectiveness, and to contain and reduce risks and costs for Canadians over time. This meant that the corporation would be responsible for setting priorities and overseeing the contractual arrangement and overall performance of the contractor. In our special examination, we found a significant deficiency in board renewal. The significant deficiency was related to the delays in the appointment of board members. However, this was outside of the control of the corporation. During the period covered by the audit, the corporation was operating with an interim board and without a president and a chief executive officer, while at the same time developing long-term strategic plans.
The corporation had many good corporate and contract management practices. We also identified weaknesses in several areas. In particular, we found that the corporation's reporting framework did not demonstrate how the corporation would measure the overall objectives of restructuring, which, as I stated earlier, were to enhance efficiency and effectiveness and to contain and reduce costs and risks for Canadians over time. Although the corporation included some performance measures in its corporate plan, it had not developed a framework for communicating the performance of the new operating model. We found that the board had not yet implemented a formal, systematic process for monitoring and reporting on risks. In addition, the corporation still faced challenges in acquiring a contract team with the necessary skills and competencies to monitor the new operating model. Improvements were also needed in the areas of strategic direction, communications, and compensation. The corporation agreed with all of our recommendations and indicated that it would act to address our concerns. However, because our audit was completed in January 2017, I cannot comment on any measures that have been taken since then. Monsieur le Président, je tiens...
Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased now to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McClellan. We'll now move to Monsieur Lajeunesse, and welcome to our committee.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, good afternoon. As mentioned by the Chair, my name is Claude Lajeunesse, and I am the Chairman of the Board of Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. And here with me this afternoon is Richard Sexton. He's our President and CEO. I first would like to thank Mr. McClellan for presenting the findings of the Office of the Auditor General's Special Audit.
By Mr. McClellan. However, I do want to provide you with a brief overview of our organization, our views on the report, and the actions we have undertaken to address its recommendations. Please allow me, however, to state upfront that we have already addressed the recommendations made by the OAG, and of course, I will discuss these in more details in a few minutes. But first, let me say a few words on AACL. Atomic Energy of Canada is a Crown corporation. Our mandate is to enable nuclear science and technology and to manage the Government of Canada's radioactive waste and decommissioning responsibilities. Most of our sites are in Ontario, Quebec, and Manitoba. Our largest site is the Chalk River Laboratories, located about 2 hours west of Ottawa. The Chalk River Laboratories are Canada's largest science and technology complex. The site has operated since the 1940s and is the birthplace of significant advances in nuclear technology. For example, the laboratories developed Canada's own CANDU reactor technology, which has been deployed in countries around the world: Argentina, Romania, South Korea, and China. For decades, the laboratories developed and produced life-saving medical isotopes for the benefits of over 1 billion people. Molybdenum-99, which was produced at Chalk River, served in the treatment and diagnosis of multiple types of cancers, as well as the diagnosis of cardiac and other illnesses. We continue to have an important mandate in nuclear science and technology, most notably in managing a program, the Federal Nuclear Science and Technology Work Plan, which serves the needs of 13 different federal departments and agencies in the areas of health, safety, security, energy, and the environment. An important part of our work is to take care of our radioactive wastes in a manner that protects the environment and brings value for the taxpayers. We have a responsibility to tackle these challenges now so as not to leave it to future generations. Most importantly, finding solutions for radioactive waste disposal enables us to protect the environment and reduce risks in the long term. This involves the decommissioning of old buildings, remediation of contaminated land, and building long-term management and disposal facilities for our radioactive waste in a manner, once more, that protects the environment, the workers involved, as well as the public. Furthermore, we have been assigned the responsibility for managing the Government of Canada's responsibility for historic, low-level radioactive wastes, where the government has accepted the responsibilities for such remediation. And this includes the very important $1.2 billion project to clean up historic waste in the municipality of Port Hope and Clarington in Ontario. Depuis 2009, le gouvernement
Beginning in 2009, the government undertook a restructuring of our organization. This has resulted in two major changes. First, the assets of our CANDU reactor division, the division which was responsible for the development and sale of the reactors, was sold to CANDU Energy Inc., a subsidiary of SNC-Lavalin. Secondly, a governance model, a new one, called Government-Owned Contractor-Operated, or GOCO, and this model was put in place in 2015 for the management of the rest of our operations, namely our nuclear laboratories and decommissioning sites. Under this model, a private company, and in this case Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, or CNL, is responsible for operating our sites. AECL continues to own the sites, but they are managed and operated by CNL. AECL's role is to identify priorities for CNL and assess their performance according to the terms of our contract with them. We have a team of experts in nuclear science and technology and decommissioning and waste management, and they oversee CNL's activities, approve their annual plans, and, if necessary, challenge what is proposed. Our goal is to protect the interests of the Government of Canada, the interests of the public, the environment, and taxpayers.
1 year before the special examination was conducted, the ACL board and management team welcomed very much the OAG special organization. We viewed the examination as an important exercise that could identify areas for organizational improvement and set the stage for the continued implementation of the then relatively new GOCO model. In terms of the findings of the special examination and the report issued by the OAG, let me make a few comments on these findings and how they have been addressed. First, let me highlight that the OAC concluded that ACL overall has good corporate management practices and good contract management practices in place. Second, with regards to deficiencies, a significant deficiency was noted in board renewal, which the OAG acknowledged is outside of the control of ACL and its board. Third, the OAG noted areas that met their examination criteria, but in respect of which there were opportunities for improvement. In terms of our response, we agreed with all of their recommendations and quickly undertook the steps necessary to address them. Specifically, management developed an action plan, which was approved by our board and which was posted publicly and is available on our website. I understand that you were provided with a copy of that action plan. These actions include implementing formal processes for the board review of the organization's risk register, the organization of public meetings, the development of a comprehensive performance measurement framework, and a review of our approach to compensation, and finally, the implementation of a formal training program for our contract management staff. All these actions were completed within 5 months of the report being issued. With respect to the one significant deficiency that was outside of our control, I am pleased to report that actions have been taken by the government to address the appointments on the board. In February 2017, after the period of the examination, the Governor and Council appointed Richard Sexton as President and CEO on an interim basis, meaning in this case for a term of 1 year or until a new President and CEO is appointed. And this year, in February, the Governor-General and Council appointed a President and CEO for a 2-year term and selected Richard Sexton. Furthermore, in June 17, the Governor and Council appointed the Chair of the Board, along with 4 members of the Board, 2 men, 2 women, consisting of 3 new members and 1 interim appointee, becoming a permanent appointee.
I'm very pleased that 2 of the 4 new members of the Board of Directors are women.
That AACL recognizes the area for improvement noted by the OAG and that management has already taken actions to address them. We welcome this expertise. We welcome the exercise as a means to continue to progress the implementation of this new governance model. Opportunities for improvement are acknowledged and appreciated, and we would be very pleased to answer questions that you may have. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lajeunesse, and we'll now move into the first round of questioning. It is a 7-minute round, and it goes to Madame Mendez, or it goes to Monsieur Massé. Monsieur Massé, vous avez...
Mr. Massé, you have 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today and to participate in the work that this committee is undertaking. And we really appreciate your presence. The Auditor General said this is a good report for the company. Of course, there were some findings, and you spoke about them. One important one that was not directly under your control, but we understand that the other recommendations, you acted swiftly to implement them. The OAG, well, the company has undertaken a considerable transformation, and which was launched in September 2015. And I know this was not the object of your audit, but I'm just curious to hear what you have to say about this. Did you observe any particular elements that were related to the findings you made? Did you notice any particular deficiencies that would have reduced risks? Do you have any information that you can share with us about this, even if it wasn't the object of your report? Thank you, Chair, for this question. Unfortunately, as you said, the objective of our audit was not to evaluate deficiencies in the new structure of the organization. The only comment that I can make on this topic is simply that in the report we identified that the organization had to create an evaluation framework that would allow it to answer this question specifically. Thank you. Mr. Lajeunesse, Mr. Sexton, now I'd like to give you the opportunity to answer this question because it wasn't a serious transformation of your company that was very specific. So in terms of these two objectives, were you satisfied that they were achieved? Did you identify any deficiencies? Were you able to reduce risks? Yes. Quite clearly, the actions that were taken since our GOCO model was implemented were such that we were able to specifically identify the deficiencies, and we were able to implement a system that allowed us to ensure that the objectives set out in the agreement were achieved. And I would like to Mr. Sexton to speak to that and to give more details about some of the initiatives that were undertaken to answer your question. Perfect. What I'm particularly interested is the fact that this transformation was a major one. You went from roughly 3,400 employees to 400, and now your operations are now involving a contract. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about the audit mechanisms that are in place that will allow you to ensure that the company that was selected to conduct these operations is under control. What measures have you implemented so that you can audit them? Mr. Sexton.
I think the question that I heard was what systems do we have in place to ensure the performance of our contractor? Correct. This is a fundamental different model that has been implemented, and we've moved relatively rapidly from a government-owned, government-operated to this new model. And the systems that we've have put in place are really mirroring the systems and processes used in other countries to monitor the performance of the contractor, specifically those used by the Department of Energy in the United States and in the UK, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. They have a very similar set of issues and also a very similar set of contract approaches. What we had embedded in the contract and embedded in our performance expectation was for the contractor to very quickly put in a system that's used to monitor the performance of their work. It's called an earned value management system. It's used throughout the world to manage very large, very complex projects. It allows you to, in a very systematic way, to monitor what work is actually being done, what does that work cost, is it behind schedule, is it above budget, below budget. It's a relatively complex system. And one of the objectives that we established for the contractor, day one, was to get that system in place. I'm happy to report, I think part of your question was, well, how do we know? One of the things we just completed about 2 or 3 months ago was we brought in an independent, ACL brought an independent auditor in. And that auditor organization, essentially, this is what they do. They go around the world and they evaluate the performance of this earned value management system. Is it embedded into the organization? Does CNL have the necessary procedures and processes? And I'm happy to report that they found that the system put into place at CNL is adequate. It identified areas for improvement, but that's we always expected it. My experience in I've done this work quite a bit in both the UK and the Department of Energy. These systems probably take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to get fully embedded into the complex organization. we're well on our way.
Super. I don't have much time because time is running really fast, but if you allow me, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't mind having, if we could have a copy of the audit that has been performed to see the conclusion of this internal audit. That would be something that for me, the committee would be interested in.
Some of these audits can be quite long, even a summary of what the audit may be, if that's all right. Thank you, Mr. Massey. We'll now move to Ms. Gallant, please.
Thank you,
Welcome to our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to our witnesses. First of all, I would like to speak to recommendation 28 on communicating with the public and the changes that AECL plans to make in terms of communicating the results. Now, we hear about decommissioning, but I understand that there's a dual mandate. We're supposed to be enabling nuclear science as well as the decommissioning of the old buildings to be replaced with new buildings. So what efforts is AECL putting forth in order for Canadians and the rest of the world to know that Canada is #1 in cobalt production in the world, that we already have 70 to 80 designs that are being proposed to CNL for the small modular reactors. CNL has a reputation as well as the positive regulatory system. Other countries are coming to this site to look to have their prototype built. And energy production existing already in Ontario, 62% of our clean energy comes from nuclear. So what is AECL doing to communicate this to the public?
Mr. Sexton, please.
You're absolutely right. It is an exciting time for the lab. There is a tremendous amount of increased notoriety of the lab across the world that I see in the last couple of years as CNL and this transformation has taken place. In terms of communicating what the lab does, we felt it best as we set this model up is to allow CNL to take the lead in communicating to the community, to the public, in terms of the good things that are being done. And I think if you were to look at their website to see how they've kind of transformed the way that they're communicating, the way that they're reaching out to the public, I think it's fundamentally changed. And we felt that early on that having AECL also communicating the same, it could confuse it. It's a relatively complex model, and the experience, again, internationally, is that the CNL types organization typically take the lead in communicating to the stakeholders and the public.
Thank you. Now, my next concern is about the transition for new board members, recommendation 26. I see in your background, Mr. Sexton, that decommissioning is mentioned 5 times, while you do hold 2 patents for radiation detection equipment. Again, the decommissioning is just one part of one mission of AECL. When we look at the different board members, well, we don't even have any background on the new board of directors, let alone any real continuity. What can you tell us about each of the board members who have been appointed thus far, and provide us with some background?
Yes, I would be very pleased to do that. First of all, the 4 new board members that were appointed, it was a lengthy process, but I can tell you that the outcome was absolutely outstanding because we appointed individuals who have pertinent experience that we were seeking. The board devised a a matrix of the needs that we had.
Pardon me, Mr.
And
Speaker.
one of our board
Mr.
members...
Chairman, what I'm looking for is for each individual
Yes.
board member, I want to know something about them.
Okay.
The issue there may be that on the website, although you have Mr. Sexton's bio, there are no bios on any of the other new board members on.
Marta Torre was appointed, first of all, on a one-year term and then was reappointed for the 3 years. Marta is an auditor. She retired from Ernst & Young, where she was a partner specializing in serving not-for-profit organizations. And she also has served and is continuing to serve as a senior-level board member for more than 20 non-for-profit organizations. She brings to the board the audit background and also brings the expertise as a board member who can really contribute to the strength of the board. Jim Burpee was appointed, one of the four, and Jim has almost 4 decades, 40 years of experience as a senior strategist and in the electricity industry, and he has worked in a variety of senior management positions for Ontario Hydro and Ontario Power Corporation, and he was president and CEO of the Canadian Electricity Association. So he brings to the board expertise on the nuclear side and also with major projects. The third person that I would like to mention is Carmen Abella. Carmen brings in absolutely outstanding expertise as a risk expert, amongst other of her talent. She was the interim risk officers for the Bank of Canada, and she was the chairperson of the board for the Institute of Internal Auditors of Canada. So her experience is absolutely pertinent to an important part of the report. Finally, the fourth person appointed was Philip Jennings. Philip is currently the Associate Deputy Minister at Natural Resources Canada, and prior to that, he's occupied a variety of senior management roles, Natural Resources Canada, Assistant Deputy Minister, major project offices, and other responsibility in government. So he brings in this knowledge of government, and he's a very, very important member of our board in the sense that his pertinence on the board is to make sure that we keep a track of what the government thinks, needs about the organization.
And
Very quickly.
how will Bill C-69 impact AECL's decision-making process?
My understanding is that the bill is currently being discussed, so I believe that once the bill is approved, we will have to look at the implications. However, let's be clear, most of the impact of the bill will be on the CNSC, who has the responsibility for the approval of the activities in the nuclear industry. And perhaps Richard would like to add on this.
Yes, we are aware of the bill. As Claude correctly identified, it's our understanding it's still kind of being drafted. As many are aware, we have 3 environmental impact assessments, that is we in the CNL, that are under review by the CNSC. It's my understanding that those will proceed as is and will not be subject to any of the Bill B-69 at this point. In the future, we do recognize both CNL and ACL that we will, if there are other significant changes to the facilities of the plant that require a full environmental impact, we will have to engage in that process.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton. We'll now, and Ms. Gallant, we'll now move to Mr. Angus. Welcome to our committee, sir. And
thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to be here. Mr. Lajeunesse, you mentioned a number of times about decommissioning and waste. So under ACL, what are the responsibilities for decommissioning and waste? You have Port Hope, you have Chalk River, you have the demonstration reactor. Do you have other sites as well? Like, what's the sum total of decommissioning and waste that you're responsible for?
I will let Richard answer in details, but let me first of all say that in all of these activities, the foremost intent that we have is safety and security. And we want to make sure that this is always the primary consideration in anything we do. And then I'd like to ask Richard to move on to that.
I think you identified most of the sites, Chalk River being the largest site for decommissioning and waste management activities. Port Hope, not far behind. It's just a relatively large project. There's White Shell, and there's the 2 demonstration projects. And then there are what we refer to as historical waste projects. Those are typically in the northern regions where material was mined and then transported down to the Port Hope. Those are the areas that we have responsibility for.
What is the long-term plan? Are you looking for one site, or are you going to decommission the sites and bury them at the location? What is the plan for assessing the waste at Port Hope or the other sites?
Well, I'll start with Port Hope. Port Hope is it's fairly straightforward. There's material, historical material used as fill in terms of the historic El Dorado processing. That material is being relocated into a highly engineered long-term waste management facility, very similar, I might add, in design to what's being proposed at Chalk River, a near-surface disposal facility. So in that case, the material's retrieved. Then there's an assessment to make sure that the material is, in fact, all been moved. And then that material and that facility will be capped. And then there's a long-term monitoring program for the long-term disposal facility. And so that kind of paints a fairly simple picture, but it's not dissimilar to what will happen at Chalk River, where there's redundant buildings, there's places where soil contamination occurred due to historical operations. Again, that material will be retrieved. It will then, if there is approval for the near-surface disposal facility, that contains the material, and that will then be moved to that facility. Again, it will be capped, and then long-term monitoring of that facility.
So the Nuclear Waste Management Organization has looked at a number of sites, Kincardine, Ignis, Hornepayne. They once came through our region, but we put the run on them in Elk Lake. Would the stuff from Port Hope be going to one of those facilities if they find a site in the north, or do you have a separate site that'll just be for Port Hope waste?
Well, I think there's 2 questions there. The material for Port Hope is and Clarington is there's 2 facilities being built. One's for Port Hope, one's for Clarington. That will be placed there, and that long-term monitoring. I think NWMO their mandate is the management of used fuel. That's the only material that they're currently managing. So and we do, as ACL, we do have used fuel, and we are working with NWMO at the point where they site the facility. Then the fuel that ACL has will be transported to that facility.
Okay, so you would transfer used fuel to a site that they would run, but for Port Hope, for the waste there, you would have a site that's relatively local. I'm just wondering, because one of the things we hear all the time is transportation of waste, and you are going to run into serious issues with municipalities along the road. So the closer the site you are, the less blowback you get from the public. So I'm just wondering how far you're looking to transport.
In general, let's take Chalk River. In general, the design and the kind of the philosophy around the near-surface disposal facility actually addresses that issue. In general, it's the safest and the most cost-effective is to not transport the waste long distance unless you have to. Some amount of waste, let's take Whiteshell, some amount of low-level waste will be transported from Whiteshell to Chalk River for final disposition in the near-surface disposal facility. So there is some transportation. Fuel's another example where we intend to consolidate the used fuel at Chalk River as a way to manage it until NWMO has their facility. It makes it easier. Again, it minimizes the transportation, and you have one place to go to, one place to transport it to.
Are you for these? And I don't know how you store nuclear waste, but you're going to have soil, you're going to have decommissioned buildings, other radioactive waste. Are you looking at a deep containment? Is that the plan?
Well, it does depend on the waste. Obviously, fuel is the highest radioactive material that we manage. That will be, the plans are for that to be disposed of in a very deep geological disposal facility. There's a class of waste called intermediate level. We're still looking at how to best handle that for ACL, and CNL is working on that. The vast majority of the material that's generated out of our decommissioning operations is low-level waste, and that is placed in a highly engineered facility that, again, very, very similar, almost exactly the same that has been built and is actually being filled at this as I speak at both Port Hope and Port Granby. Those facilities have lots of layers in engineering, and you monitor to see if there's any compromise to the containment. And the idea around those designs is to contain the radioactive material.
Thank you, Mr. Sexton. Thank you, Mr. Angus. We'll now move to Mr. Area, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sexton, you used the word near surface facility. Should we call it the above ground facility?
I'm sorry?
Above ground facility, is it not the appropriate term?
Well, it's referred...
Okay, coming to that, I'm talking about the above ground landfill you have for the 1 million cubic meter
Yes.
waste at Chalk River.
Right.
The International Atomic Energy Agency, as you know, that states near surface disposal is not suitable for waste with long-lived radionuclides. But still you are going ahead with this here.
The facility that we have, the near-surface disposal, is actually fully compliant with the IAEA guidance. It has...
Doesn't IAEA guidelines state that, the radioactive waste is the best way is to isolate it from the biosphere?
That's what these facilities do. They isolate it from the environment.
But that is not my understanding is, there is a group of concerned citizens. You must have known these people, yes. Concerned citizens of Renfrew County and area.
Yes.
You have interacted with them?
Have we contacted?
Have you interacted with them?
Oh,
have you talked to them?
Yes.
And their group also includes some of the scientists who actually worked at Chalk River?
Yes.
So their concern is that this is going against the IAEA guidelines.
Well, let me, first of all, ACL's role here is not to determine whether this is safe or unsafe. We're really not. Our organization is not set up that. We rely on the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission.
Okay, you talked about expertise with ACL, but now you have contracted out most of the operations to 5 private sector companies, correct?
Yes.
So then what does ACL do? And, Auditor General report says that you have not implemented a formal systematic process for monitoring and reporting on risks.
Well, those risks are different. I mean, in terms, those are business risks. We rely on the...
And what about the operational risk?
We monitor and do oversight routinely of the operational risks. And we also rely on the monitoring of the regulator to verify that CNL is in fact complying with all regulatory requirements.
And do you know that Ottawa River Valley is full of fault lines and prone to quakes?
Yes.
And are you still comfortable going ahead with this waste disposal facility?
Well, I'm certainly not the seismic expert. That would be again, that's a
Then
question.
whom should we talk to on that?
You would have to talk to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. They have the expertise. They're the ones that provide the license or permission, if you will. They're the ones that would determine whether the design is adequate or inadequate. We certainly have expertise within our organization to understand, is this a reasonable approach, but we rely on the CNSC.
Sorry to cut you off because of the limited time. The nuclear reactor entombment project that is proposed, IAEA once again does not recommend reactor entombment except in emergency. But that is what you are proposing to do?
Well, first of all, AECL doesn't propose it directly. That's proposed by CNL.
So what you're saying is that is none of your responsibility. Your job is...
No, it's our responsibility because it's our liability. What I'm saying is that, and I'm very familiar with that IAEA, and I think it's important to note that is guidance. And that there are other countries that have similar nuclear liabilities. I'll take, for example, the United States. Their regulatory process allows a process called entombment, which is very similar. So it's not something that is not allowed or outside what is determined by other regulatory bodies as
But
safe.
the very fact, Mr. Sexton, sorry once again to cut you off.
Mr. Area, let's try to keep it coming through the chair, and so it's not just direct back and forth.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, once again through you, I would like to ask, that Mr. Sexton mentioned that it's just a guidance, but those guidelines are brought forward after a great deal of study. So just to push them out that it's just a guidance, I don't think it's acceptable.
Well, it's first, let me point out, it's not AECL's decision on which guidance should or should not. That is CNSC's clear responsibility. It's just, that's not within our mandate.
So are you aware that there's one current e-petition going on, e-petition 1450?
I'm sorry?
There's an e-petition, Mr. Chair. There's an e-petition that is on collecting signatures from Canadians that deals with this nuclear waste. I just want to know whether they're aware of it.
I'll allow the question. Again, we want this committee to look more at the scope of the Auditor General's report and recommendations coming out of that. I also recognize that all politics is local, and Mr. Area, you're bringing constituents' concerns, but we do want to try to keep on the scope of the AG. I'll allow that question, but just from here on in, we kind of want to stick closer to the Auditor General's. Mr. Sexton.
I think the question is AECL aware of that? Absolutely. We very closely monitor the concerns and that are being raised. We're very aware of those.
Thank you, Mr. Area. We'll now move to Monsieur Deltel, please.
Thank you so much, sir. Chair, gentlemen, be welcome to your House of Commons. First of all, Mr. Chair, I want to raise the issue that I'm very proud to sit behind Madame the MP from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, because she knows what she's talking. Chalk River is in her writing. Right. So this is why I'm very pleased. And if you have any question about that, she's the one to ask if you're not there, for sure. But as you're there, first of all, I want to thank you because it's a very important issue to address, and we all recognize important and the historical role played by Chalk River and the installation that we have in the Canadian atomic energy we had for the last century, and we are very proud of what you have done and what you're doing and what you will do. Alors, à cet effet, j'aimerais quand même...
Now, I'd like to bring your attention to 2 points. First, the Berry site You said your landfill site. You said in your presentation that amongst the projects that you have, it is the decommissioning of contaminated sites. So decommissioning of sites and contaminated land. What is your game plan? How much will it cost? How much time will it take? Thank you. The program was developed and the Government of Canada approved a substantial amount to allow us to conduct these operations for decommissioning of buildings and remediation. And I'll ask Mr. Sexton to give you more details about this. But the Board of Directors is well aware of the plan that was developed, and these plans will allow us to have a site with fewer buildings in the next few years. And the site will be cleaner and safer for employees.
There is a detailed plan that exists. It has existed for at least probably 10 years, but don't quote me on that. It lays out a long-term plan. I think it ends in about 70 years, and it has estimates on the amount of waste and cost. I think more relevant is the 10-year plan that we have worked with CNL. CNL developed a very detailed 10-year and actually 5-year. In those plans, I'll give you some examples. There's a plan to decommission about 120 buildings.
At Chalk River?
At Chalk River. I'm happy to report that approximately 50 of those facilities have already been decommissioned. In that 10-year plan, it lays out in a good amount of detail what order that the facilities will be decommissioned, what areas will be decommissioned, and there's a very similar plan out at Whiteshell, which is a closure site. And I would say those are the two that we're really focusing on.
Okay. So for the next 10 years, what is the budget and who will pay for that? Canadian taxpayer, or will you get money from your operation?
Essentially, the decommissioning comes out of a decommissioning fund. The fund is valued approximately at $7 billion, and it comes out of that funding.
But this funding is coming from taxpayer?
Yes.
Or from taxpayer?
Yes, because it's a Canadian liability.
Fine. Justement, tout à l'heure, j'ai parlé des bienfaits de...
Earlier, I talked about the advantages of what was done at Chalk River, and Mr. Lajeunesse, you said that more than 1 billion people were able to benefit from the isotopes, the medical isotopes that were developed. And it's important to bear that in mind, because there's a lot of prejudice against this industry, and sometimes they try to scare people, but you really have done a good job over the past 70 years. It can be profitable for the entire country. So now I'd like to mention the question of landfill sites. There was a lot of questions about this. It's a big project, but a lot of people wonder, how come you've had a landfill site so near the river, and a river that feeds water to millions of people? How come you've done this?
There was first of all, we are aware of the proximity to the river. The analysis of the site, the strategy was, again, to minimize the transport of the material. So the strategy laid out was to try to site the facility, which is done very frequently across the world with these types of sites, have the site at the facilities, so you're not transporting this material all over the place. The decision to site it is a complex one, and not one that I'm qualified to say that it's either the right site or the wrong site. What I can tell you is that is part of the process by which the CNSC will review the location, and more importantly, the location's not as important as the degree at which the material is contained. I'll give you an example, actually, at Port Granby. The radioactive material currently is sitting really right on the banks of the lake. And what we're doing is we're simply moving it away from the lake, I think maybe 700 meters or something. It's not even a kilometer, and then it's contained. So the issue at hand, I recognize the sensitivity around impact to water. I can assure you that ACL is equally concerned. As Claude mentioned, we are very conscious of protecting the environment. That's part of our mandate. But we really have to rely on the expertise of a very robust regulatory process that comes in the form of CNSC to ensure ourselves that there will be no impact to the river.
Thank you, Monsieur Daltel. We'll now move to Mr. Lefebvre and Mr. Chen on a 5-minute split.
We'll do our best here to split. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on the location, very quickly, how long has the Chalk River site been the AECL site?
I think it's over 60 years.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
67 years. That's what I thought. It's been long.
Yeah.
Since I can remember anyways, and I'm not
Yes.
that old. But
70 years.
70 years, I'm told.
Over 7 years,
Yes.
I thought. First of all, I want to congratulate you on the report. We see a lot of reports come through in general. Good job. Even though in the context that the board was changing, as well as the administration as well. So in general, that's just a general comment. One of the things that came to me that I was surprised with is with respect to public meetings. One of the findings in the report was that since 2009, there had not been a public meeting held. That is a requirement under the Financial Services Act, Financial Administration Act, as you're aware. I believe, though, that you've held one meeting since about last year. Can you tell me why, since 2009 to 2017, there was not one publicly held meeting?
I can't tell you why precisely. I think it fell somehow during all this restructuration and all the changes that had been made.
But that's why it's even more important to have public meetings
Absolutely.
at that point than not.
And that's why we set up the public meeting last year, which was, I think, very well attended. And this week, actually, we have our second public annual meeting in 2 years, and we'll have it in Pinawa to allow the individuals in the Whiteshed area and others, because it's webcast across the country. Anyone who wants to listen in can do that, and we'll have that public meeting in Pinawa. And I can assure you that in the coming years we will have our annual public meeting every year.
And I appreciate that, but again, I'm just concerned that for almost 6-7 years, it's so important, as Mr. Daltel was saying. It is an industry that is not very well perceived, in the sense that there's a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of concerns. The fact that the less that you communicate with the public, the more that you actually exacerbate those concerns. Now, how much time do I have left, Mr. Chair?
You have 2.5 minutes.
Okay, well, I said I would share with my friend. I will.
So
we'll go back to okay. I'm just curious. I'd like to know from you guys with respect to the change that happened when you converted to this government-owned, contracted, operated model. I want to know what the benefits are. What have you seen? I know you haven't been there for that long of a period of time, but before it was basically government-owned, and now it's contracted out. What are the benefits that you see from that? Go ahead.
Yes. Well, the benefits that it has been seen across the world, because Canada did a great job of going out and saying, here's what our situation is with the lab. What are other countries doing, and what has been working? And I would argue that our GOCO model that is being implemented in Canada is truly kind of a Canadian GOCO model, which is it's based on many of the lessons learned both at the Department of Energy and at the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority in the UK that has $165 billion liability. So their liability is significantly larger in terms of decommissioning and waste management. And so the benefits that you get is a cultural transition that occurs relatively quickly. It's one that improves safety performance. There's actual data out there that shows that the performance relative to health and safety environment actually improves. And so you get better value for money. You have a contractor who's able to extract lessons learned across the world on this type of work. It's very complex. It requires a high degree of specialization in terms of understanding how to do this. So what you get through the GOCO model is that expertise and a commercial edge to it.
Thank you. We're up on our time. Sean, do you want to go now, or do you want to? Is it all right if we go here and back? All right. Ms. Gallant, and then I have Sean and Jean and Charlie.
Okay. Just before I go into the next round, the sort of questions I want to ask, I noticed that Mr. Sexton used the term notoriety, that ACL Chalk River has a notoriety around the world. And notoriety has a negative connotation, the state of being famous or well known for some bad quality or deed. So when you use that word, I was quite disturbed, as you're now the president. So would you explain why you use notoriety, a word, instead of fame, something with a negative connotation about Chalk River Laboratories?
Well, I'm sorry if I left that impression and probably wasn't the best term to use. What I really wanted to express is that the status of the Chalk River site has significantly improved in terms of the understanding of the rest of the world, in understanding what its mission is. It's recognized now as in a process of being revitalized. It's now playing a significant role on the international stage relative to things like small modular reactors. It's seen as an example of a change using the GOCO model. We regularly interface with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, sharing some lessons learned in terms of that. So I misspoke in terms of notoriety. What I meant is in the most positive way, the reputation of CNL has been improved significantly over the last couple years.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to move to the near-surface waste disposal. It was raised earlier. And I understand that CNL is currently involved in another near-surface waste disposal site near Port Hope. They're currently putting the material, taking them out of the neighborhoods and into this facility. So they're getting hands-on experience beforehand, and then later on they'll be applying this experience to the near-surface waste disposal at Chalk River. Now, when the proposal for the near-surface waste disposal facility was brought to the CNSC initially, they were sent back with 200 recommendations. Can you tell me whether or not all those recommendations were addressed?
I can't tell you if all of them. I can tell you that when the process is done, that everyone will be addressed, and that's just part of the process. And in terms of being dispositioned, the comments or questions, that is part of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission process. It's a very systematic, very robust process. So if there's any questions CNL would be expected to provide a detailed written response on whatever the questions were. And I know that CNL is well on their way to answering those questions. And it's in these processes, it's not unexpected that there's several rounds of these types of questions. This is a complex question. The regulator is quite robust, as they should be, to ensure the health and safety and protection of things like the river. So this is part of the process. It's not unexpected that there would be a high volume of questions. That's normal for this type of review process.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Chair, can you compare and contrast the project underway at Port Hope to that which is proposed at Chalk River?
In terms of the design, and if you actually looked at it, if and when we have approval to build a facility at Chalk River, to the average person, you wouldn't be able to tell a difference. These facilities are, again, simply, they are highly engineered, designed. They have multiple layers of material that prevents any radioactive material from getting into the environment. It also has a fairly complex water purification system that ensures any water that is collected while it's open is processed, and the radioactivity is removed from that water before it's discharged into the environment. So they are almost identical. The material being placed into the two facilities is somewhat different. There's a wider variety of materials that we find at Chalk River, and there's different types of radioactivity that we will experience at Chalk River, where, in the case, I'm looking over to Kim, in the case of Port Hope and Port Granby, that material that we're retrieving is generally kind of on the low end of low-level waste, and it's kind of all the same, except for some of the things that part of this is we are going into a disposal facility, and we are finding things that were not necessarily expected, chemicals and cylinders and that type of thing, and they're dispositioning those.
We'll now move to Mr. Chen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sexton, earlier you talked about GOCO lending itself to better value for money. And I love that because we want better value and we want to save money. And I suspect that was a guiding principle in terms of the restructuring process that was undertaken at AECL, because ultimately we want to increase efficiency, increase effectiveness, while at the same time being able to save money. So the corporation went from 3,400 employees to 40. When those 40 positions were filled, were those positions posted so that existing staff could apply for them and fill those positions under the new restructured corporation, or were existing employees transitioned into those 40 roles based on what I would suspect management and the board? Or was it some combination of those two methods?
Thank you. First of all, I think the other factor in the decision is safety and security. And I think we don't want to give at all the impression that saving money is more important than safety and security. So that's the first principle that I'd like to point out. The second point that you're mentioning, indeed, the positions were advertised. We had some search firms who looked for some of the key individuals to be hired, and there were possibilities for employees of then CNL to apply, and some have applied and have been successful and are still there.
So these are new positions, and what I'm trying to grasp is the discrepancy, because from my understanding, during the restructuring process, senior employees were hired, and when they were hired, their salaries were set based on the salary of the predecessor CEO and president. I know the new president and CEO has a salary that is $100,000 less than his predecessor. And what I gather from the Auditor General's report is that you now have senior staff that were hired during restructuring who now fall under the new model, and their salaries have been set at what I suspect would be higher because they were hired at a time when the corporation was much larger and the responsibilities were greater. Can you shed some light on that?
Yes, I can. First of all, we had 2 external firms look at the salary structure that would be needed to implement with success the concept of AACL as the entity that would be responsible for the functioning eventually of CNL and making sure that it does its work the way it should be. That requires obviously some exceptional talent. And even if you look on page 16 of the OAG Special Examination Report, it does say that some positions may require specialty, special expertise, and with appropriate compensation. So some of the individuals, of course, were hired because of that special requirement. The other individuals who have been hired were hired according to the salary structure.
Fair enough, but let me ask the question to the Auditor General. I'm reading in this report that the salary has been aligned to the previous salary of the CEO and president in a corporation that had 3,400 employees. So without really having any insight into the compensation framework, because that has not been disclosed in the corporation's annual report, I'm just left with a lot of questions. One of the questions in my mind is, do you have staff, senior employees that are being paid more than your CEO or relatively close to the CEO? Because in my mind, the CEO and the president should be paid the most in any corporation. They are the one ultimately responsible. Did the Auditor General find any information in that regard?
So, Mr. Chair, if I may respond. So when we looked at compensation, you've raised a lot of different issues in your observation. Suffice it to say that our expectation is not always that the CEO be the highest paid individual in an organization. Although that should be a driving factor, this alignment is also one of the considerations, given that the Governor and Council has the right to set the compensation of the CEO, but is not necessarily a given that everything falls nicely in line. What was unique in this situation, as described in our exam, is that things were in a bit of flux. So you had a previous arrangement in which the GIC salary had been established. That was changed after the board had taken a look at how to staff and compensate the new employees. And what was really for us of importance is that there was a need to have a conversation and engage in an understanding about what was happening and why it was happening. So that there would be a clear understanding about decisions that were being made in relation to VPs, for example, below the CEO and the CEO's compensation. Mr. Chair, this is something that has also been raised in a previous special exam reports that we've examined in other Crown corporations. It's also an issue that is likely going to come up in some that have been recently tabled in the last few days. So for us, this is a bit of an issue where there's lots of moving parts to the entire issue about compensation of senior executives in organizations. And ultimately, for us, we think improved transparency is an important aspect.
And with respect to that, are you satisfied with how the corporation is disclosing its compensation of employees within its annual report? As a Crown corporation, there should be a lot of transparency.
So at the time we did the audit of AACL, we identified this as a recommendation for something that they should consider. As Mr. Lajeunesse has indicated, they have taken steps to respond to the recommendations we've identified. However, as I said in my opening statement, I have not gone back and audited all of those as of today. So I can't really respond to your question because I have not completed the audit work on what exists today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go to Mr. Angus and then to Ms. Yip.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things I noticed when I was looking through the audit on terms of weaknesses was on the issue of systems and practices, the board has not yet implemented a formal systemic process for monitoring and reporting on risks identified in the corporate risk register. That jumped out at me because you're in the business of risk more than anything else. I mean, you have to reassure the public on risk. And I want to go back to the incident of 10 years ago, the impasse between AECL and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission during the isotope crisis, because it was about the question of who called what was an acceptable risk. There was the issue if the isotopes were not created, it could have effects, serious effects in the medical system. Linda Keane at the time said the risks were 1,000 times greater than international standards, and she overruled, and then she was subsequently fired by the Harper government. So in that 10 years, how has the corporate structure changed in terms of addressing who decides what is acceptable risk? How do you maintain that with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and how do you report that risk?
You want me to take that? Go ahead. Okay. Well, it was a bit before my time. I wasn't involved in that, but it's very clear now, absolutely clear. Who decides whether it's safe or not safe is the responsibility of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. ACL is not, that's not our role. We certainly are interested, and every day we are out looking at the operations to ensure that
okay, but in that case, it was a routine safety inspection. They found there was parts missing that were needed. So that's AECL's responsibility, is it not?
No, that would be the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Well, the first responsibility resides with CNL. They're the ones responsible by their license to operate the facilities safely and protect the environment and the workers. So the first step of that responsibility is with CNL, and we expect and demand and monitor that they're exercising their that responsibility. But we're not the regulator. It's very clear to both in our contractual structure and the way we interface with them that we're not the regulator. The regulator, CNSC, is the organization and will remain the organization that ensures the safety of their operation.
So out of that issue, did you develop protocols to ensure that, because if there's a question of weakness in risk monitoring in your risk register, I'm just wondering if there's still unfulfilled questions that arise out of identifying who's responsible, how it's transmitted, and in case the public needs to be known, whose responsibility is that?
Right. I think we're maybe getting wrapped around the word risk. The risk register that I think is referred to is really around a business risk. It does have health and safety as one of the risks, but there's other risks in terms of running this as a business, running it as a contract. In terms of managing the type of risks I think you're referring to in terms of health and safety and operation of the facilities, first and foremost, that is the responsibility of CNL, and they are then assessed routinely by the CNSC in terms of ensuring that risk, if you will, is adequately managed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. We'll now move to Ms. Yip, please.
Why was there such a big drop from 3,400 employees to 43 employees? How can the safety of the operation still be sufficient?
Yes, all the employees, the 3,200 I think it was at the time, were transferred to CNL. So they're still there doing the work that needs to be done, perhaps in a different approach with a culture that's perhaps now more adequate for the needs of the organization. But these employees have not disappeared. The role has just been made in a different way. That is, CNL does if you want, the work, the research, the decommissioning, waste management, and so on. And the role of the 40 people in AECL is to ensure that the objectives of the government are met.
It's wonderful that 2 out of your 4 new board members are women. but what is the total composition of your board, and are there ethnically diverse directors on the board?
I do not have here, but we get reports regularly on that. I don't have at hand here, but I could provide you with that information.
Thank you.
Mr. Sexton.
I think I recall that the overall ratio of women in our organization is 40%.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. I don't have any other questions. If there's no other questions, we can close. I guess I'll go back to a question that Ms. Gallant had earlier, and that was in regards to the new directors that are coming on. And we have Mr. Lajeunesse bio on the website. Is there a reason that the director's bio wouldn't be put on the website? All you have is the name of the directors, and it almost looks like there's a space for a bio, but it was hard to find out how many of them are actually experienced. I appreciated that you went through it and showed us the experience in different areas that they may have, but I'm just wondering if their bio will be included.
Mr. Chair, I can assure you that these bios will be on the site.
All right. The one other question that I would ask is it normal practice to have someone who is still, I believe, employed as a deputy minister within Natural Resources to also sit on the board?
Yes, that's been the case for at least 10 years.
Okay, and only within, AECL, or is there other places within Crown corporations where deputy ministers it may be mandated that someone from the department be part of it? I see Mr. McClellan.
Mr. Chair, I may be able to help that. It does occur in other Crown corporations. It is not universal. So you're right to sort of recognize it as something that is different from what you might see regularly. Typically, my experience has been that appointments of government officials in an ex officio capacity has a lot to do with the significance of the institution to the broader mandates of the government. So just as an example, Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation is another where there is ex officio members from, say, Department of Finance. Canada Mortgage and Housing has likewise done something very similar to bring in members from government departments, given the systemic nature of some of the fiscal liabilities and issues that those organizations are managing.
So I think I can understand it, like with the finance side of it, and you have a government that brings forward a vision or a direction that they want to go, so they have someone there. Is there any fear of a conflict in any way? Like, I mean, here we have, I'm trying to think of perhaps an example, but I mean, we have, highly, Canadian public is very concerned about nuclear and nuclear energy and that, and I'm not certain what the government's mandate on that is, but it just seems like to me it might be one of those departments where, having that government influence sitting on the board, there could be a conflict that could arise.
So I think it's a fair question to ask, and one that needs to be managed. Just as we have reported in some other special examinations where you have representative boards, there are challenges and what I mean by a representative board is that you have stakeholders with an interest in the activities of the organization participating in the governance of that organization. Similarly, in those, you have the same question that you raised as to whether or not that potentially poses a conflict of interest. Our position and what we've recommended is that needs to be carefully managed when issues are brought to the board that potentially could be seen in that regard as to how the voting and participation of those members occurs with those particular types of events.
So are there places where you would expect that this director would recluse himself? We always hear the term that such and such is it's an arm's length Crown corporation. Well, how arm's length is it if deputy ministers are actually sitting on the board?
So I think, you know, if it's managed properly in terms of dealing with those particular issues that you're raising, you can get the best of both worlds effectively. You can get the insight into what's important from the principal shareholder, and I think it is important not to lose sight that although we create an arm's length Crown Corporation to manage issues outside the normal activities of government, it is still an instrument of the government, and it is still principal shareholder is the government, and they often have a point of view that's important for board members to be aware of. So it's a very useful tool in that capacity to allow information to be shared with board members. You then have to watch where the particular issues might be that may be perceived as creating a conflict, and try to manage those, perhaps through recusal, but perhaps by other means as well.
So is it public knowledge when that director would recluse himself of anything, or who checks that out? I mean, it doesn't fall under the ethics commissioner. I mean, if we had a minister that was in a conflict, he would recuse himself of any decision or any conversation, any talk during that. But who polices that?
So first, it would be at the board itself. Second, all those Crown corporations are subject to a special examination by the Office of the Auditor General, and one of the things that we do look at is the way in which conflicts are managed in individual organizations. Certainly, the minutes of boards are not public knowledge to the best of my understanding, so it's largely dealt with through that mechanism.
One other quick question just to Mr. Lajeunesse or to Mr. McClellan. You said in your report that there was a deficiency on the representation on the board, and we've had new members added to the board and seems capable individuals. We now have 5 sitting on the board, and the statute allows 5 to 7 or 4 to 7 sitting on the board. Do you think that having 5 on the board is sufficient, or do you think that are you still looking for more expertise? Are you looking for another position or two to put onto the board, or are you quite happy that 5 is a good working number?
Mr. Chair, the 7 members of the board include the CEO. So we do have 6 individuals on the board now, and we are actually, this past week, we've undertaken with PCO discussions on how to appoint the 7th board member, and we have also, over the last 4 months, redeveloped the matrix of needs for the board and identified precisely where we would like this particular individual to fill the needs of the board.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your attendance today and good questions. We appreciate your quick, timely response to the recommendations of the Auditor General. It's quite the thing when we call a committee meeting and before we get here, the real report is that we've already addressed and pretty well accomplished all the recommendations. So we commend you on that, and we wish you all the best as you continue to meet those recommendations fully. And thank you for your attendance today. Thank you, committee. We are adjourned.